Imagine discovering one day that your home has been at war for 3 centuries, and nobody told you. No battles, no bloodshed, not even a single soldier involved. But legally, it was still a war. This isn't fiction, it's real history. A war that began in the year 1651 and wasn't officially ended until 1986, a staggering 335 years later. How does something like that even happen? Well, strap in, because today we're diving deep into one of history's strangest and most overlooked conflicts, the 335 Years' War between the Netherlands and a tiny group of islands off the coast of England. To understand how a paper war like this could last for centuries, we have to rewind to the 17th century, a time of betrayals, revolutions, and shifting alliances. England was tearing itself apart in a brutal civil war between the Royalists, supporters of King Charles I, and the Parliamentarians, led by Oliver Cromwell. Battles raged across the country. Cities were besieged, and power shifted back and forth. But here's where things get interesting. By 1651, the Royalists were on the losing side. Desperate and outnumbered, their last stronghold wasn't some mighty fortress or castle. It was a remote cluster of islands in the far southwest of England. Welcome to the Isles of Scilly, a place so remote that most people in England today have never even heard of it. Even in the 1600s, it was barely inhabited, a desolate, wind-swept outpost. But it had one advantage. It was surrounded by treacherous waters, making it an ideal hideout for pirates and privateers. The last remaining Royalist fleet had retreated here, turning the Isles of Scilly into their personal naval base. From this rocky outpost, Royalist warships and pirates began raiding merchant vessels from across Europe, including the Dutch. Now the Netherlands wasn't even involved in England's war. They were just trying to run their business, trading goods across Europe. But as their ships kept getting attacked, frustration grew. Dutch merchants were losing fortunes, and soon pressure fell on one man to do something about it: Admiral Martin Tromp. Tromp was a legendary Dutch naval commander, known for his bold strategies and fearless leadership. And in 1651, he decided he had had enough. He sailed to the Isles of Scilly, bringing with him a fleet of warships, and issued a final warning: compensate us for the damage, or we declare war. The Royalists, still stubborn despite being on the verge of collapse, refused. So Tromp declared war on the Isles of Scilly, and then he left. Here's the crazy part. The war never actually happened. No battles, no gunfire, no soldiers marching ashore. Why? Because the Dutch had already won. Not by fighting, but because just months later, the English parliamentarians crushed the Royalists and took back the Isles of Scilly. The Royalists surrendered. The Dutch fleet sailed home. England moved on. But someone forgot to tell the paperwork. Here's where the absurdity kicks in. When the war ended in 1651, the Dutch had already declared war, but nobody had thought to sign a peace treaty. This meant that on paper, the Isles of Scilly were still at war with the Netherlands for 3 centuries. For 335 years, nobody noticed. The Scillonians, they lived their lives in peace, completely unaware they were technically at war with one of the most powerful naval nations in history. The Dutch, they completely forgot too. After all, they had bigger wars to fight. The Anglo-Dutch Wars, the Napoleonic Wars, World War I and World War II. And so this paper war stretched on, longer than any other war in human history. Fast forward to 1986. A historian named Roy Duncan from the Isles of Scilly stumbled upon a strange fact in old government records. His home was still technically at war with the Netherlands. Confused and amused, he contacted Dutch officials to ask, are we still at war? After some digging, the Dutch government confirmed, yes, on paper, the war was still ongoing. So, on April 17, 1986, a Dutch ambassador traveled to the Isles of Scilly to officially sign a peace treaty, ending the war after 335 years of non-combat. In a humorous moment, the Dutch ambassador remarked, "It must have been terrifying to be at war for so long without knowing it." If you love this crazy but true story, there are so many more like it waiting to be uncovered. Hit that subscribe button for more insane history and tell me in the comments, what's the weirdest forgotten war or conflict you've ever heard of? Maybe your suggestion will be our next deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring the past, because history is stranger than fiction.